All right, everybody, good afternoon. My name is Mike Marotta. This is our first webinar in our series where we're talking about mobile devices to support the inclusive classroom. As you guys get yourself settled into the webinar space here, just make sure that your lines are muted because we will not have a whole lot of chatting back and forth between us today. We will use the chat window to talk back and forth, but luckily for you, I think I might be the only voice that we get today. So lucky us, right? Here we go. So as we start, we'll give you just kind of some housekeeping stuff, some information about what we're going to be going over, some quick pieces of information about me. So if you need to get in touch with me for anything, when you signed up for this, in addition to the 4 webinars that we're going to do, that are spaced out one a week for the next couple weeks, we'll have those 1-hour webinars where we can be together in the same space at the same time. We'll also have some online work that we'll do together, and my contact info is up there as well. We'll talk about that at the end for just a second. But here's some of my other information if you need it. My website address, my email address, my Twitter handle. If you're in any webinar, any workshop I ever do, you know how I feel about Twitter. If you haven't heard me talk before, I'll take 2 seconds to say if you're not doing Twitter, you're missing out on a huge resource for all of us as technology professionals. Think about the idea of you may be in an area where you are the only person who does assistive technology, and Twitter will give you that opportunity to connect to large groups of people who do Twitter as well and can share resources and be a resource for you. So I would definitely encourage you, if you're not on it yet, think about it. If you're scared of it, email me and I would be happy to walk you through it because I think it's a really important tool for us to use. So right about now you might be saying to yourself, what do you mean I just signed up for a 4-week course? And yes, you did. You signed up for it, and I applaud you for that. I think that shows a real desire to increase your knowledge beyond that kind of one-off webinar or presentation setting that we may sit in at any given time. This gives us an opportunity across these 4 weeks to talk about things at a much deeper level. And that's what makes this very exciting for me as we go through it, and I hope for you also. So like I mentioned, we'll have 4 webinars. Each webinar will kick off a week's worth of material that we will work on together through the CTD website. And so we'll have these 1-hour webinars as kind of the introduction to the topic. And then throughout the week, I'll have different activities posted that we're going to work on together. We'll be able to communicate through the message forum. We'll be able to share information. So this gives us kind of a sense of what we're building towards as we go through these 4 weeks. Today, we'll focus on mobile devices, looking at the actual hardware itself, some information on access, and then the accessibility that's built into these tools. So we'll get kind of a foundational understanding of the tools themselves. Week 2 and week 3 will focus on the tools we will use to engage our learner. And so that's such a big area that it takes 2 weeks to go over it. So throughout weeks 2 and 3, we will focus on information on the apps and software that we might use, as well as the cloud-based tools that we will use to provide support to the learners that we're working with. And then with the activities surrounding that, you'll be able to get your hands on a bunch of stuff. So we'll do that as we go through weeks 2 and 3. Week 4 will be the put it all together week. So we start with kind of the background information today. We look at the meat of it with the tools that we might use weeks 2 and 3. And then finally week 4, we pull it all together, put a nice bow on it, talk about the idea of implementation, managing devices, working together with IT support, working together with other professionals, and then looking at training and professional development that has to go into this idea of mobile devices in the classroom to make it successful. And then as we go through the weeks, I mentioned that we'll have these opportunities to explore technology. And so we'll look at the tools that are out there. There's some activities I put together. You will be asked to create some things with some tools and some software, and then share that with each other. And so we'll do that throughout the forums, which will actually be very exciting as we go through. As I mentioned before, if you have comments today, throw them in the chat window. If something I show sparks an idea or sparks a thought, please throw it in there, because I'd love for us to be participatory as much as we can within this webinar platform. So definitely feel free to use the chat window as we go through. So here's our activities for today. As we do our webinar today, we'll talk about the mobile devices themselves, the platforms. We'll look at a quick introduction to access into those devices, and then the accessibility built into those devices. All right. I see Amy mentioning that the audio is going in and out. I don't know if anybody else is having that same issue. Amy, I'm not sure if that's you or if that could be me. It certainly could be me. But if someone gives me a little heads up, I'll let you know whether I need to do some changing. All right, so we have kind of a mix of good and bad audio going on as I'm looking in the chat window. Ken's requesting for me to be a little louder. Be careful what you wish for, Ken. Here it comes. Get ready. Now, let me turn my phone up just a little bit. Let me make sure that I'm holding the microphone closer to my mouth, and we'll go from there. If you guys continue to have problems, though, let me know. The people that are having trouble on your computers, check to make sure that you're getting a good signal into your computer so you're not dropping out on the audio. Okay? So thank you. If you still have problems, keep letting me know, and we'll figure it out as we go. So we'll start with our plan, if you will, and thinking about what we're looking at for mobile devices in the classroom. There's a couple pictures up there, and they're kind of those. When we think of mobile devices in the classroom, what does that look like? On the bottom, there's some Chromebooks, and it's an entire pile of them, all opened up and ready to go. On the right-hand side, we have what I tend to think of when I go in the classroom is the computers on wheels, or the cows, as they call them, which always makes me laugh in a classroom. But the carts that provide us with our support to our tools as we go through. But really, even before we get to the idea of a cart, and I always think of the cart as kind of that end result. Okay, we've figured things out. We've come to the idea of a cart. I have this video. I'm not going to play it because I'm afraid that it's not going to come across real well inside the PowerPoint, but it is embedded in the course module for this week. And so what I would ask you, take a minute, and actually take 3 minutes because that's how long the video is, and watch the video and comment on it in the forum. I find this to be a very inspirational video when I start to talk with teachers and talk with professionals about how we're going to put technology in the classroom, because they come to this idea with, well, I already have enough to do. I already have, quite frankly, too much to do. And now you want me to do this too, but I want it to work for my students. I want my students to be successful. And this kind of hits on a lot of those issues of things that we all deal with every day, but in order to make change and be successful, looking at ways to make sure that we are giving our individuals the tools they need in order to be successful. And as we move through it, and I'm sure people have seen this already. This is certainly not new information, but it gives us a nice framework. This is called the cone of learning. This is Edgar Dale came up with this. And it's the idea of passive versus active learning. The passive learning tending to be reading, hearing words, seeing, or watching a movie, looking at a demonstration, something like that. And what we find is that as we move towards a more active way of learning, our learners tend to remember more. And so the research says that from reading, after 2 weeks, people will tend to remember about 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see. Now, as soon as we look at somebody looking at something and hearing it, the percentage jumps up to 50%. When we start thinking about the active part of learning, that's where we really see the jump, where someone moves to the idea of participating in a discussion or some kind of, or sharing their knowledge out with someone else or a group. That would be the idea of learning and remembering about 70% of what we say. And then finally, we think about the doing part of it, doing a presentation, creating a simulation, making something. We see that we remember about 90% of that information. And so when we think about that, in the context, remember that cone of learning came out in 1969. So I'm pretty sure in 1969 there weren't carts of iPads in the classroom. So we're thinking about what does that mean for the classroom of today? And as we go through, and so what we've started to see is people coming up with modified cones of learning where they're talking more about it embedded with media and the ability to remember more and what kinds of tools we have to make sure we can have this sticking of the information. And the idea with this is we move through and look to the learner outcomes that are on the right side of the cone now. When we think about the top of the cone, the reading, the hearing, the looking at images, or viewing a movie, those tend to be, are pretty straightforward: define, describe, list, and explain learner outcomes. What we're looking to get our students to, and what our students want to be as learners in our inclusive classrooms, is moving down the cone into being able to apply and demonstrate and practice, as well as finally thinking about being content creators, and move to the learner outcomes of analyzing information, designing, creating, and evaluating with that information, and using the tools at hand to do that. And so some of the tools are listed on the right-hand side. Some of them I whited out because even when this enriched media cone had come out, this still mentioned VHS tapes, and I think we're pretty sure if we went into any room and said to a group of students, we're going to watch a VHS tape today, I'm pretty sure no one would know what we were talking about. So I took some of those out. But you get kind of the idea there as far as, and where I like to think of how can we get our students to that very bottom of that cone, which is media production, creating something, using the tools on their mobile devices to create something. And what's interesting, and this was a research or a report that just came out, if you're familiar with the group called Project Tomorrow. And they just came out with their newest findings. They do a lot of studies with students in the K through 12 environment. And in fact, in this one survey that they just released the findings for, they had surveyed over 431,000 students nationwide. And it's interesting because what they found, and I kind of boiled it down to these top 10 things, which kind of gives us a sense of where we're at, and it fits very nicely into our discussion today. Of the 10 things everyone should know about students' digital learning. So these are the things that students found to be most important to them. The idea of having a single tool available to them is not the way our learners think now. Our learners think, whatever my task is, I'm going to use a certain tool for this. Which is very interesting if we think about the idea of one-to-one computing or one-to-one devices in a classroom. That's counter to what this survey has found, because what students are doing is they're using different tools depending on what they're trying to do. Maybe they're using laptops for certain tasks. writing reports, taking tests, working on projects. But then they're looking at smartphones, and I would even throw tablets in there too, even though I think most of it I was really talking about smartphones. I think about touch-enabled devices. Smartphones and even to an extent tablets are still seen as tools for social connectedness and then accessing content in some way, watching a video, visiting a website. So there is this idea that not one device will be the answer for everything. It depends on the topic. It depends on the task. Students are also spending less time in traditional social networking sites like a Facebook, where 41% of students in 6th through 12th grades say they've never used them, but instead spend more time on content creation sites such as YouTube, where almost half the students identified using YouTube all the time. Again, we could say, what does all the time mean? But that's just kind of a snapshot of what the survey found. Students are interested in taking classes online or doing some kind of virtual class. The one topic that students reported back that they would most like to take online was a math class, which to me is very interesting. I'd love to talk to these students and find out. Math to me seems like something I would almost need to be interacting with someone right there in person, but maybe not. That's just me, I think. When we think about students and their desire to be mobile with their learning, 75% reported back that students should have access to a mobile device during the school day. Some students, actually a pretty high percentage of them, are already using their own phone, their own smartphone for classwork. And then, and I apologize if the picture got in the way at the bottom there, almost 50% of students are taking pictures of assignments or textbook pages in order to remember information. And I think this in itself is a huge missed opportunity in some classrooms of not allowing students to take out a phone, even if it's just for that minute, to document some information on the board or some kind of piece of information in their notes. This is the way learners want to remember things, and we should encourage that. Better for them than taking notes. So very, very interesting. Yeah, and John, I agree. These stats are very, very interesting. I haven't read the whole report yet. Just kind of breezed through it. I think it was only released last week or perhaps the week before. But this snapshot was a really nice kind of takeaway from this report. And I've already told you my affinity for Twitter. This was interesting to me too, is that 46% of 9th to 12th graders are Twitter users, which in just the 4 years since this was last done as a survey, that's 4 times more students using Twitter now as a way to get information. And so now they're talking about the idea of using digital tools, mobile tools, to connect with teachers, and now using them outside of class in order to connect with teachers and communicate. 48% are doing that by email, 16% by texting, which again, for me, that seems like a high number for texting, but that's fine. That's what they come back with. That's fine. Interesting. And it's really funny that when I was looking at this, I was doing a training last week on Friday, and in the middle of the training, I gave people a 15-minute break, and I said, go stretch your legs. Almost to a person in this room, every teacher got on their class webpage to respond back to questions from students because they had a substitute all day. And she went, and each of the teachers went back in, answered a bunch of questions within that 5 or 10 minutes, and then went on their break. And so this is part of that way that students are expecting to interact, even when a teacher's not there for the day. Coding, we hear a lot of information about coding and having courses to teach students to code. And this has been a huge jump with students wanting to learn how to code, especially girls. They're finding that there's a high percentage of girls that are interested in coding and that as courses. The gamification of learning comes up as number 3. So now we start really seeing the pieces that students were very interested in. Almost 2/3 of students want to use games for learning. And some of the reasons that they had for that, students felt that games made a difficult concept easier to understand. And then 67% commented on engagement. So looking at a way to engage them in content. And these are very astute observations, and it's what we say all along. And John mentioned it. It backs up what you hear from students. They want to find a way to get brought into the learning. Not just have it happen to them, but be brought into it. Number 2, students are what they're calling mobilists. Students use their mobile devices for just about everything. So you look at this, smartphone users by grades, and in the 9 to 12 grades, 82% of users are smartphone users. 68% in the 6th to 8th grade region, and then 46% in the 3rd to 5th grade. So that is the preferred tool. And in fact, you see some surveys that are out there now that talk about the idea that the one area of mobile devices we should expect to see constant growth in is in the smartphone market, and then we will eventually come to a point potentially where that will be the device of choice for most people. And then finally, the first thing they commented on in this little report was students wanting to learn by YouTube. Whether they're finding videos online to assist them with their homework, or the exciting number that I pulled from this, 28% of the students say they are regularly watching videos created by their own teachers, which is a fantastic number. That's great. And then the little comment at the bottom was that not being able to access social media is the biggest barrier when students think about using technology in school. Continues to this day to be the same issue that students are having, is that when your networks are locked down and the access is not readily available, these are the issues they're finding, especially if they're using YouTube to find information about materials and learn content and they're not able to. So the bigger picture for us as we talk about this throughout our 4 weeks together, and I'll give you some of these kind of big discussion questions, which we may not get a chance to chat about in the webinar, but I want you to think about as you move through. How do we effectively leverage this power to support all of our learners? And I think that's kind of the big kind of issue here that's overarching everything we're going to talk about. One of your activities for the week, and so we won't go deep into it now, but there's a great resource, and it's from Intel. So, think about that as you start to look at it, is that there is sometimes a slant towards Intel products. So I will put that little warning up there. But really what's nice is the process that they thought of with the idea of success with mobile devices in K through 12. It's about planning, buy-in, devices, and then finally implementation. And one of the activities we'll work on this week is talking about the planning and looking at readiness and exploring the different kinds of devices. We'll touch on the platforms for devices today, but there's an entire section in that K-12 blueprint that talks about each of the device platforms and kind of goes through the feature list of each, which I'm a huge fan of the feature list. I will constantly push people back towards that. I actually just had a teacher email me before we started, and she said, and the email was, if someone had to buy a computer, do you think a Mac or a PC is better? And I don't know how many times I've heard that question asked, and I just kind of chuckle a little bit each time. I haven't answered her yet, because right away I just wanted to write back, it depends, and send it back, because it's not as easy as that as an answer. But giving the features and understanding what is out there will help you make those decisions for students. So we'll talk technology. We'll give a kind of a broad stroke of the technology tools that we're going to be speaking of for the next 3 weeks, and get a sense of what these tools do and what it is we're talking about. I think what's interesting, except for the platform of a Chromebook now. So take that out of our equation for a second, because a Chromebook tends to keep the same design platform as a standard laptop most times. Predominantly, the devices that we're talking about are touch-enabled devices. They are touch-screen devices. Even our computers now are much more, there are more readily available touch-screen laptops. In fact, I just bought one not long ago. I bought a little Windows machine. It's 11-inch Windows computer. It's from Acer. No plug intended, just kind of giving you the picture. I wanted a small computer that I could take with me when I traveled, and it needed to run Windows 8. I bought it. It was like $200. I bought it, got it home, and then I realized when I got it home, it had a touch screen built into it, which I was not expecting for a $200 laptop. But these things where, if you remember touch screens of old, they were extra devices that we attached to the front of monitors, and they plugged in separately and had different software that has to run with them, and they were thousands of dollars to get things working. Now it's in just about all the laptop models we can get have a touchscreen option. So touch has become our new normal. Not just iPads, not just our phones, but every device we think about. And then when we think about that, why is it so valuable to use these devices as technology, as assistive technology? We think about them, they're everywhere, right? You couldn't spin around in a circle right now, any of you, and not hit at least one device, I feel. I'm sitting in front of me right now on my desk as I talk to you. I have 2 tablets, 2 laptops, and a phone, all within easy reach. So these devices are everywhere. Now, granted, I might be the exception of having ridiculous amounts of them around, but you get the idea. They are available. They're out there. They're easily accessible. They're easy to support. Anybody who does assistive technology, you know that some of our tools that we use are not always the most intuitive, and people are not typically willing to try to troubleshoot them. But if we have somebody using a tablet to access their learning, whether it's an iPad or an Android tablet in their home that they're using for learning activities, if that has a problem with its Wi-Fi, there's a good chance someone else in the house will be comfortable enough to figure out why it doesn't have Wi-Fi anymore. So people are willing to try it, willing to help, willing to try to fix things and troubleshoot. And then finally, which is always the issue for us in ET, is having devices that are more socially acceptable for people. Making sure that my device does not look different than everyone else. And I've been finding this more and more, and I've been really happy, and anybody who's heard me talk knows that I love Chrome, and I love Chromebooks, but I'm having really great opportunities to watch some of the students I support not have to worry about where the computer is that they have to log into now. And they can just go up to the cart in their class like everybody else in class, log in just like everybody else in class, and all of their tools that I've trained them on pop up on any device they log into. We think about the idea of the power of some of those cloud services like that. That is the power of them. It's the ability to just be like everyone else. Whether I need extra supports or not, it doesn't matter. I'm using the same support, which is fantastic. You know, and this is just kind of our little something to think about here. We think of the iPad as kind of the start of this whole tablet and mobile device revolution in education. The iPad itself is only 5 years old. It came out April 3rd, 2010 is when the iPad came out. And think about that from a technology and education standpoint. It's almost impossible now to think back to a time before there were tablets available. It just seems like forever ago. And it's really, in the bigger scheme of things, not very long ago when this whole kind of mobile device revolution started, and we moved away from laptops and into these mobile tablet devices. And, you know, so What will the next 5 years bring? Will we still be using tablets? Who knows? Will we be using wearable technology that's embedded into everything we wear or everything that we have around us? I don't know. But it's something to think about. Is that, and I was just talking to an IT person the other day, on Thursday last week, and he was telling me about how he was considering purchasing tablets now, and that these tablets would be the tool that his school would use for the next 5 years. That was going to be his technology plan for 5 years. That's why that previous slide is so important. I said to him, you realize that the iPad itself is only 5 years old. Think of all the different things that are available now from just the first iPad. Is 5 years making sense now as a technology tool anymore? Or does a 2-year plan make more sense? Just having people revisit their thought process of what might be around in the next couple of years. And with this, our whole thought as I move through this with us for these few weeks, I will continue to harp on the idea of the SET framework and considering the fact that we must think of the person we're working with. It goes back to my email I got this morning of what's the best computer? And then the answer is, it depends. I don't know. You tell me what the person needs to do. Who's the person? Where are they using it? How are they using it? And then finally, we can come up with a solution of what makes the most sense. And I recognize, I'm a realist. I spend enough time in schools to recognize the reality of sometimes these decisions are beyond our control. And then we go back to that idea of coming up with a plan, what I mentioned before about that K-12 blueprint document, coming up with a plan. Just because you have more technology in a school doesn't mean you're meeting the needs of your students. And that's very hard for people to get sometimes because they feel like more technology must be better. And then my comment to them is, it could be better, or quite honestly, it could be worse. You might make it worse for some students. You have to be mindful of that and remember that that could happen. And so I gave you an example of a completed SET form if you're not familiar. But the idea with the SET form, and I also gave you the version of the SET form that I like to use because nowhere on the form, when I share it with people, team members, parents, the students themselves, administrators, whoever is part of my team, I share this modified form because nowhere on this form does it say to them what tool do they think makes the most sense right now. Instead, it refocuses them back to thinking about the student and the skills they have and the abilities they have, the environment where they're going to use technology, and the tasks they're going to do. People will continue to write on there, I want an iPad, or must have a tablet, or must have a Chromebook. And people will do that. But giving them an opportunity to refocus their thought process into the parts that are so critical for us as we think about matching students with tech. And so I give you some, these are, that little icon on the screen is my personal reflection icon. These are some thoughts as you move through and maybe some conversation starters for us as we communicate back and forth in the forum. Thinking about requests that you might have had for mobile devices. Was that request appropriate? Or was it strictly, I want tool X, whatever tool X might be? And then think about if you don't use the SET framework, how might that SET framework help us to better focus the solutions for the person's needs? So think about that. Those would be kind of the conversation starters as we move through our time together that I'll use to kind of refocus us back to the bigger questions. These are the bigger questions of what it is and what's out there. When we think about mobile devices, we'll start with the idea of access and thinking about touch access, because most of the devices are touch-enabled. And so think about it for a second. What skill does someone need to use a touch-enabled mobile device? Throw it in the chat window. What do you need to be able to do? and we'll watch as they roll through, and we'll just kind of chat about one or two of them. So that's good. People are kind of throwing out there hand-eye coordination, having the ability to understand cause and effect. That's a good one, Emma. That's really good. And Susan, the fine motor planning, because you have to target items on the screen. Very important. The ability to point with some pointer, as somebody just mentioned, Sherry did. Whether it's a stylus or your finger. These devices predominantly are looking for direct access. They are wanting you to physically interact with the screen. And so you think about whether that is a pointer, whether that is your finger or two fingers or whatever it might be. Some of the skills that someone has to have go much bigger than just being able to use a finger, because you think about that idea of isolating a finger, the motor planning, as someone mentioned, you thinking about having to line that up on the screen and actually hit the part of the screen you want to hit. All of those issues that come up could make this a very difficult type of device for someone to access. So you think about that idea as you go through, and some of the other thoughts about the touch screen. So it's not necessarily about pressure, which is nice about touch devices. It's really about contact. I need to be able to touch the screen to make sure I get that access. And so on the screen, I have a picture of someone wearing a texting glove. Actually, that someone is my daughter, and that was my glove, but she took it. But at least I got a picture from it, so I guess that's good. But the idea with that is that for someone, and I had bought these for a student I'm working with, who lays his entire hand on his iPad screen and then wants to move across the screen. And what happens is the minute he puts his hands on the screen, it makes contact and it selects whatever's under it. And so for him, we were going to use a texting glove where it's a knit glove and only the fingertips are conductive and will make a connection. So with that, he could lay his entire hand on the screen and slide it around the glass, and when he was ready, he could simply click on the item that he wanted with his index finger. Really nice. And what you can also do, they sell that as spools of thread. You can buy what's called conductive thread, and you can sew that into things. And I had a student I was working with who did not want to use the gloves, but had a hard time isolating a finger to hit his device, to tap on the icons on his iPad. So we bought conductive thread, and on each of his sweatshirts that he wears, we sewed a circle of conductive thread into the sweatshirt, into the wrist part of the sweatshirt on the sleeve. And so now he's just able to lay his arm down on his iPad, and he doesn't have to wear the glove. And he can just use, basically he's using the gross movement of his entire arm to select things. But that was the solution because he did not want to use the gloves, which is fine. And again, what did the user want? That was the user drove that decision. The gloves would have been easy. They were about $4. We could have bought a pair at any CVS in the winter and just given to him. But he was also an 8th grade boy who wanted no part of that, which is understandable. So that's fine. In addition to the idea of selecting things and pointing, there might be the need to use gestures. And is someone able to do that? To click and drag, so to drag their finger across something, to tap, to hold their finger down, to do a swipe with a finger, or a pinch. All of these things that go well beyond the idea of just simply isolating a finger, but then become other access methods or strategies I need to use. And in the accessibility of the devices, we can adjust some of that, but it's something to consider. So as we think about hardware, I'll roll through some of the hardware ideas as we start thinking about them. And I just like starting with this picture of, on the left is a gentleman, probably from about the 80s, or as my high school daughter says, look at that guy, he's all the way from the 80s. And so fine, that's okay. And then she asks, did I ever have a trench coat? And does my hair ever look like that? And we go off on that tangent. But all of that technology that he has piled around him is now available on any tablet you have or your phone that's in your pocket at any given point. So the power of these devices and what we can do with them can't be ignored and has to be used in order to be effective for our students. So I'll give you some broad strokes about the different hardwares that we're thinking about as we talk about stuff. So we think about the idea of the Apple products, the iPod, iPhone, the iPad. Thinking about those Apple devices, most of the tablets that we think of tend to be Apple tablets for the longest time. iPads were kind of the biggest seller in education. We've seen a shift in that, but predominantly you still see there are more of the iPads around than most other tablets. The App Store for the Apple products is bigger than any of the other stores, probably bigger than all the other stores combined, quite honestly. So that ability to have tools available is key. So thinking about that as we start looking at the bigger issues of using these devices. Android is the second one we'll talk about. One takeaway from the Android platform is that it is a somewhat fragmented platform. It's an open platform where Apple's products are a closed platform. You get it from Apple. Apple manages the Apple iOS. With Android, you can have an Android tablet or smartphone from just about, there's got to be dozens of manufacturers that produce some type of Android device, whether it's smartphones, tablets, even things like Amazon's the Kindle Fire, the Nook tablet from Barnes & Noble. Those tablets are all Android tablets. And so one of the things about that that's important to remind people is Android tablets, because of their fragmented platform, have many different types of features built into them. And just because you have an Android tablet doesn't mean it does the same thing as another Android tablet. So making sure you understand what you have and what it has in it. We've seen more of a push lately for the Windows tablet. So you see the Surface, and actually the Surface 3 just came out, which will give us the opportunity to run Windows-type programs on a tablet platform. So we'll have apps, and you can also run programs in there. Another option, again, if it's the infrastructure that you have, that might make sense. And then other manufacturers produce Windows tablets. So you look at a lot of your computer manufacturers will produce a tablet that might be a 7-inch, an 8-inch, a 10-inch tablet, but it runs the full version of Windows. The one I have on the screen is that's an Acer tablet that I own that runs Windows 8, so I'm able to load all of my software in it that I might need. If I need Solo or I need some of the other programs for a student, I can load those into that tablet and use it in a tablet platform. And then you knew you wouldn't get far without me saying something about Chrome. But Chromebooks are another option. We think about hardware. And again, the big takeaway from Chromebooks is that you start to become a little less dependent on the hardware because your supports tie themselves to your profile. So your profile lives online in the cloud, and you run software through their apps and extensions that you use in the App Store. Those are tied to your profile. I can walk up to any device that has Chrome on it, log in, and all of my supports come down to support me right there at that device. Very nice. One of the other things, and I throw these in because, you know why? They're mobile devices, but so can we repurpose them? Hello?
Yes?
Oh, sorry. Somebody else jumped in. With the e-readers, they might be there.
I have a dialogue game.
And can we use them and create materials for them that students can use? Some we can. Some are tablet-based. Some are that e-ink, which is those gray tablet tools. we might be able to use them. Thinking about ways that we can do that. And when we look at our tools that we talk about in week 2 and week 3, we'll talk about the idea of can we build things on web pages and use some of these e-reader devices to access them. To, first of all, give us more potential for devices in a classroom that may work, and then to extend learning to any tool that a student might have. I'll give you a couple slides of things to remember, because it tends to be when people get mobile devices and think about them, they spend all their money on the mobile devices and not saving anything for all this other stuff. If you want to connect your devices to any kind of display unit, do you need adapters? That's not a question. That should have been a statement. You need adapters. So do you have money to get them, whether it's for your Apple devices or your Chrome devices or your Windows devices that just will connect right in and be able to plug things in right with a USB plug. So thinking about the accessories that go with that. Cases and mounts, again, nothing scarier than moving through a school and seeing students with what I like to call naked tablets just kind of walking around with no cases or anything on them to protect them from falling. So keep that in mind as far as thinking about what we might want to do to protect those tablets. Or does it need to have straps on it for carrying? Does it need to have a mount for some alternate access? A wheelchair, a desk, whatever it might be. Thinking about different ideas of what the student might need in order to access it effectively. And then the idea of access aids. So we already talked about the idea of styluses. Thinking about a stylus, or even on the left-hand side of the screen is a key guard. If a student's using a device with the same layout all the time, but they need help selecting items on the screen, maybe a key guard helps. It gives them some structure of where they can click on a screen. And then speakers are important if we think about students who are using tools maybe for communication, thinking about the idea of making sure they have amplified speech that comes out of these devices so that they can be heard. Other things that are important. As we move through the access piece, now we talk about switches. This is the idea for any student who direct access is not going to be their preferred method. How are they going to access this device? So if they're using iOS devices, which would be the iPad, the iPhone, or the iPod Touch, you can have from iOS 7 all the way up to the current in 8, you have switch control built in to the accessibility. So you can go into your accessibility, turn on switch control, and have switch access into the device. If you have an Android device that has the newest version of the operating system, which is called the Lollipop, which I don't know why, but it is, and it's, what you're looking for is Android 5.0 or above, that is the version of it that will have accessibility built in for switch access. And I was actually pretty excited this morning when I woke up. My phone restarted itself and actually updated itself to Lollipop, so that's pretty exciting. But that's one of the things we have. One of the important things to remember about with switch access is, first of all, how do you plug the switch into it? And so you have a couple of examples on the screen right now of different devices, whether they plug in physically, so the device on the bottom plugs in directly into your iPad, or whether they connect through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth and allow you to have switch closures. So you have different options of how the switches connect in. But really, when you're thinking about switches, one of the most important things to consider is, what do you have access to? Can you control the menus? Can you control apps? Does it give you control of all of the device features, or only certain apps, or even certain functions in the apps? So just because it's switch accessible doesn't mean that the app you want to use is switch accessible. So keep that in mind, and it might be some trial and error. I know for the iOS devices, one of the little rules that someone told me once, and I'll share it with you guys, if an app works with VoiceOver in the iOS devices, it will work with switches because it uses the same kind of functionality. So if you go in the App Store and you look through the app description and it says it will work with VoiceOver, it's a good chance that that app will also work with switches too. The other thing we think about is not just switch access, but other alternate access into the tablet. And so do we need to use an expanded keyboard? Now there's lots of keyboards out there that would be Bluetooth keyboards that you could use, so they come in cases and all that other fun stuff. But what if you need an expanded keyboard, like the big keys? For the Apple devices, you can plug in what Apple sells is called their camera connection kit. And on that device, it has a USB plug. And you can plug in a USB keyboard. And I know the big keys works. Not every keyboard works, but that would be your interface tool you would use to see if you could get access with your keyboard. For some of the other devices, Chromebooks, even though they don't run Windows or the Mac operating system on a Chromebook, they run Chrome as their operating system. You can plug other devices into them. If you're working with a device that does not need a driver to run, so trackball, joystick, on the screen there is the picture of the Don Johnson switch interface. You can plug those USB devices into your Chromebook and they will work. You'll have that alternate access into the Chromebook. In addition to things like the Tracker Pro, so if you're looking for head control on a Chromebook, you can do that because the Tracker Pro will plug right into it, and it doesn't need any software loaded into the computer. So now I can do head control on a Chromebook, and I can also run switches through something like the Bluetooth, which comes from AbleNet, and that uses Bluetooth. So it can connect into the device using Bluetooth. So thinking about how you're going to access these tools. If you're thinking about Windows or Android devices, think about, do they have USB plugs? The new Surface 3 has a USB plug in it. You could plug something directly into it. Smaller Windows tablets or even your Android tablets have a mini USB or micro USB, and you could get an adapter plug. I have a picture on the screen there of the adapter plug called the micro USB OTG cable. OTG stands for on the go. You can plug that in and now you can attach any standard USB device into a Windows tablet or an Android tablet. Again, depending on the tablet, you'll get different functionality from that, but you will get the opportunity to at least plug other things into it. And we start thinking about some of those Windows tablets that either they're from the manufacturers, so they're Acer or Dell sells them. Those are full-function computers. They'll have the accessibility features that you're familiar with from Windows. So that will give you options for the different types of support that someone might need. And then by plugging one of those cables in, I can basically plug any device I want into it that allows me to get access to it, so alternate access of some kind. It's really very, very nice. The other thing I want to throw out there, something to consider, is the idea of eye gaze. So we saw in the Chromebook the idea of using head control. So again, we're talking about a very specialized access method that someone might use, but you could use on some of these mobile devices. Well, now what we start seeing is Tobii, the company called Tobii, has their iMobile device, which is an eye gaze tool that has a USB on it that you can plug directly into a tablet. So they actually sell it as part of a package right with the Surface tablet. But you can buy just the eye gaze part separately. And the eye gaze part will allow you to plug it into a USB tablet, so a tablet that has some kind of USB plug in it. So if you have to convert it with the little converter that I showed you, or it plugs directly in, whichever. But now a person will be able to control their tablet with their eyes. And so now we've moved from that point of someone being stuck and not being able to use a tablet device because they didn't have direct selection, to now this whole world opening up to all of these options of alternate access into some of these mobile devices, which is giving people access that they wouldn't have had originally. So all of these things we've talked about as we think about access and the platforms and what they run and what kind of apps are available, all comes back to the slide I actually added in today after that person emailed me first thing this morning. How do you decide on the best device? And best is obviously in quotation marks there. What is the best device? And the answer to that is features, features, features. That's how you decide the best device. You figure out what does the person need, what are they able to do, what do they have to do. Match that to the devices that are out there. I think as tablets and mobile devices start to kind of continue their evolution, we'll see a lot more built-in support for some of the individuals we need the kinds of support for. I think at some point, if I had to guess, we will see mobile devices that allow us to use our eyes to control them. I just think at some point that will be built in. The cameras in will be good enough that that kind of feature will show up in our devices. The ability to plug things in and use separate access tools to control them. But at this point where we are right now, that might not be your case on every device. So if you have someone that has alternate access needs, that has to be one of your biggest driving features that you look for, is what can they use, and can their access method give them control over all the functions they need in that device. So as we kind of think about that, really what we've done now is we've kind of just laid the foundation a little bit, understanding the tools that are out there, the different platforms. Sometimes it's refreshing to remind people that when we think mobile devices, it's more than just an iPad. It's all of these other things we can think of. As we kind of wrap up in our last couple minutes, I'll ask you guys, any other questions as we go through? Did that kind of spark something in your thought process that you want to ask before we wrap up our session together today? The beauty of something longer than just a single hour, and what makes this so much fun for me as we start to do it, and I hope fun for you too, is the idea that the discussion doesn't stop right now. It actually just starts right now. And what we will find is that through the website, through the CTD website, when you go back into it, there are activities that we will be able to do all week. And so they'll ask you to explore different things, provide your feedback on certain tools and the way that things get done. So there's different activities that are in there. There's the K-12 blueprint that I put up there. So you'll be able to take that and bring it back to your organization and look at things like, what is our readiness to use mobile devices? Are we ready? Are we ready infrastructure-wise? Are we ready with staff being ready to accept devices like that? And I think that will be a very kind of eye-opening experience with those readiness charts. So I'm excited for you to see that. Tammy mentioned, what did I mean when I said girls prefer to code? That is a new kind of learning experience that people are learning to develop and create the code that runs things. So maybe do the coding that creates an app. Maybe a code performs some kind of task on a computer. And so coding is what they're calling that. And what we're finding is that some schools and some organizations are creating courses around that for people to be able to do that and learn how to do that so that they can build things. You can build apps. You can build things on the computer. That's a really good idea. It was a good comment. Do you have any resource suggestions for tech funding? I think that as we go through funding is always an interesting experience, to say the least. It depends on where your organization is. If you're a school district, and can you tie into an initiative that's already there to get some funding out of people? If you're thinking about individual devices, or a device just for an individual you might be working with, and looking at some of those other creative funding sources that are in your community, to this day, one of my favorite funding sources in my community is all of the civic groups that are in our communities, and looking at them to talk about connecting people in need in the community with technology tools. And I've had very good success getting things like the Rotary Club, the Elks, to fund devices that someone might need. So if I'm working with an individual who maybe is transitioning out of school and into the community to work, but needs a device and doesn't have the money to pay for it, I've gone to the Rotary Club, which is made up of businesses in my community, and they've provided funds to buy that person a device to take into the community with them to work. And I think that's a really interesting, creative way to do that. Teresa, usually Lisa. So basically, I'm reading Teresa's question. Sorry, I started to read it out loud and stopped myself. Teresa's question basically boils down to how can a person, a consumer, whether it's a parent and a student, a parent and a child, work with the school district to give a evaluation that is more extensive. And I think what you'll find is that some districts may have their own people on staff or services they use to do evaluations. Remember, in a school district, you can always request an outside independent evaluation if you don't feel like you're getting the information back about an assessment that you wanted. The other thing that I like to encourage people all the time is think about consideration. Try things. Get the team on board to try things before we dive right into a full-on evaluation. Because we may be able to solve the problems quickly by trialing different things. And so knowledge of what's out there is really important. So hopefully, Teresa, maybe you can bring this information back to your school and encourage them to think about tools that are out there. And then thank you. John just posted up all of the AT centers and across the country in the different states. And I appreciate that. Thank you. Saves me from typing as I'm sitting here talking. Thanks. All right, so we're past our time. I apologize. I kept you a little longer, a couple minutes. I thank you for participating. That was really great. I like the back and forth as we go through. I'm excited to work with you throughout the week. We'll go through the different activities together. Please participate. Please share your information. That's how we're going to learn more, is by sharing with each other. So I'm hoping that we'll really get in there and dive into those activities. And then we will be back together next week on Monday at 2 Eastern for the next webinar. We'll talk about the tools. And then, thank you. Yes, will you post these questions and answers in the discussion forum? Yeah, I think all this information goes in the forum, I believe. But we'll make sure that all this information gets put over there so you guys have access to it. All right, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for staying a couple minutes later. I appreciate it. And I will talk to you throughout the week.